I was just thinking about it, and it occurs to me, if she's coming around a mountain, what the hell does that say about her husband? Oh my God.
3, 2, 1.
Excuse me. Pretty Mr. Gizmo, huh, kids?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Chillin' with Sasquatch. And tonight we're going to look at a bear, some chocolate, and the worst conquistador ever. And I don't mean as in the baddest or the most negatively effective. The one that did everything the worstest. Like he wasn't good at it. He unsuccessfully did a bunch of horrible things, but they were horrible. They were successfully horrible, but not what he was trying to do. What's up, North American, North Alabama cryptid, Mr. and Mrs. Knack? What is up, bud? Let's see if we can roll back here a little bit. Claiborne County Transparency gets the gold. Good to see you, bud. We've got the Smoking Auditor who gets the silver. Judd gets the bronze. Welcome in. ATL's joined the chat. It's good to see you, bud. Welcome back. Tales Told in the Dark. Send me some lines when you get them. That's what I'm saying. So we're going to check out the bear first. That's the first thing we're doing is this thing here with the bear. So back in 1864, one of those great white hunters out in the Pacific Northwest somewhere killed a bear of supposedly immense size that was so large that when he decided to take the bear pelt with him, he had to leave behind a whole bunch of other crap because it was so big that it was more than his allotted weight for pelts from a trapper. So he ended up having to like junk half his crew on the way back. But the records and whatnot from all three of these various bear sightings that all generally match the same description, with the exception of one that matches the physical description but not the size. So maybe it was a juvenile or maybe it was a slightly different variation. But this brings the question, is there an unknown species of bear wandering the Great White North? Is there a hybrid of two known species of bear that are being repeatedly contacted? Or are we dealing with some kind of like dimensional machine elf walking interdimensional bears? I don't know. But the approach I'm taking with it is I'm thinking it might be either a relic throwback population of short faced cave bears, or possibly an interbreed between a female polar bear and a male grizzly. And I'll get to that, why I think that more likely than the other later. Scotty Waddles, good to see you, bud. I'll be right back. What in the world just happened? That is inappropriate and wrong. That's the wrong place. It didn't even get halfway through this. Okay. I was going to go try to look at your newest community post, but I failed miserably. You are the man bear pig. Really? You don't have any audio on this video? Are we serious? Oh, no, I was talking to my daughter. My daughter walked in, was standing behind the camera talking. Yeah, y'all had no audio that whole time. Really? Okay. Let me take a look at why. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Why is it not sharing audio at all? Was it sharing audio at the beginning? All right, that worked. See where we lost it. Okay, y'all haven't had audio at all. Not even a little bit. Okay. All right. Well, this is a good this will be a good experience. Let's take care of that trash. Um we'll start there. I'm gonna pop that up. And oh, I bet I know what it is. Hold up. I bet I know what it is. Um I got the wrong thing over here doing. All right. Let's turn that one off and see what happens here.
Strange, unexplained bear.
Now do you hear it?
They skinned the animal, then decapitated it.
See, I'm a moron. Sometimes I do things wrong. All right, let's start back from the very fracking beginning because this is why I hate doing this stuff. It's okay. It's all right. This is the reason we live is just for the fight.
In 1864, a mysterious bear is killed. Its fur is yellowish tan with brown eyes, long claws, and a strange shaped skull. Known as MacFarlane's Bear, the specimen continues to stump zoologists to this day, with theories ranging from a polar grizzly hybrid to an entirely undiscovered species of bear, known scientifically as Ventularctus inopinatus, or the ancient unexpected bear.
Sup, Bootsy? Welcome
Is
in.
MacFarlane's bear a lost descendant of the giant short-faced bear, thought to have gone extinct over 10,000 years ago? No one has ever seen or reported a bear like this before or since the specimen's discovery, making it truly the world's most rarest bear. On the Arctic tundra far north in Canada in 1864, two Inuit hunters were out hunting along the icy shores of Franklin Bay. Both men noticed a strange-looking bear up ahead of them, one that didn't quite fit the normal description that they have experienced with a polar bear. Well armed, they carefully made their way closer, then decided to frighten the strange bear. Not wanting to get any closer, they stopped by a driftwood stand constructed by the two men prior to this incident. They used this stand to help steady their aim. One of the brothers carried a Hudson Bay flintlock musket, the other a 6-foot hand-carved spear. They sat and waited, this strange bear slowly making its way closer, the thing sniffing, perhaps looking to the brothers as a possible food source. The brother with the musket aimed his weapon, then waited for this bear to get to the appropriate range, where he fired.
So now my kids and my wife are all angry at me, but I do feel better.
The shot hit and wounded the beast, but failed to kill it, making the creature panic and grow into a furious rage. It lunged at the man with the musket, but his brother intervened with his spear, the man slicing down the enraged bear's side. This allowed the other brother to escape, and he dropped his musket, then unsheathed his knife. This is where the two men got a good look at this strange, unexplained bear.
All right. So if they hadn't got a good look at it up to now, I imagine when you go to whittling on him, you'll probably get a real close look.
They skinned the animal, then decapitated it. They would send both to Roderick R. MacFarlane, who worked with the Hudson Bay Company, because they knew him as a naturalist and Arctic explorer. MacFarlane, who was also adept to the polar bear, found this specimen curious. Unlike the white fur common with the Arctic bear, this creature was described to have notably tan fur and brown rings around its eyes. MacFarlane found nothing peculiar with this bear, thinking it just an oddly colored, barren ground grizzly, and he shipped off the pelt and the skull to the Smithsonian. When the pelt and skull arrived, it was quickly cataloged number 1979 of the MacFarlane collection, skin number 8706 and skull number 7149, collected June 24th, 1864. This was 1864, and the United States was embroiled in the middle of a deadly and violent civil war.
Right.
It is not surprising the specimen was quickly stored away and thus
Sasquatch killed
forgotten about.
Abraham Lincoln.
That was until 1918. Dr. Clinton Hart Merriam, often cited as the godfather of modern zoology, uncovered this strange remains, and the strange bear could finally get examined. This was, indeed, no barren ground grizzly. Dr. Merriam asked about the story behind such a bear, quickly deciding it was, indeed, not a polar bear.
Hey, Ben,
Yet
welcome
the specimen was also
Good to
shot
see you,
far
bud.
above the normal brown bear habitat, far north. Too far north. At the time, Merriam was the foremost expert on North American bears, having made it a personal mission to classify and document all the different species and subspecies of bears which populated the continent. It quickly became apparent that in North America alone, there were great variations in specific bear species. Currently, there are 8 species of bears in the world: the spectacled bear, the giant panda, the sloth bear, the Asiatic black bear, the American black bear, the sun bear, the polar bear, and the brown bear. All 8
And there's the Raichu bear, the Pooh bear, the Kimchi bear, and the little bitty cutie bear that you see whenever they're those freaking yuppies dress up their kids in like the little bear outfits and walk them on leashes. It's the most hilarious thing I've ever seen.
originate from the same family, the Ursidae. 12 million years ago, the spectacled bear and the giant panda diverged from this lineage. Next was the sloth bear, diverging around 7 million years ago. The Asiatic and American black bear came next at around 6 million years ago. The sun bear then diverged.
All right, I think the sloth bear is getting a bad rap. If I remember right, they don't got no front tooths. They eat insects and stuff.
Diverged around 5 million years ago. The last major divergence was relatively recent, around 400,000 years ago. This is when the polar bear split off from the brown bear. Each of these have subspecies within them, most famously the brown bear, or Ursus arctos. There is the grizzly, Kodiak, or even the extinct Californian brown bear. The black bear even has subspecies, like the cinnamon bear, more common within the northeastern edge of normal black bear habitat. Merriam named 96 distinct varieties of brown bears alone, which would later be simplified down to 9 subspecies. Yet even with all this knowledge, Merriam could not decipher what he held within his hands. It seemed to have pieces of both coastal brown bear, but also polar bear. Yet, not quite. What puzzled Merriam the most was this bear's skull. He found it oddly
All
shaped, shorter.
So this is where this thing goes a little bit off the rails. First of all, this was an exceptionally large specimen. By either polar bear or black bear standards, it was slightly larger than your average, or not black bear, but brown bear standards. It was slightly larger than your average on both counts. And so when you look at the bear, you expect its facial proportions to be reminiscent of that of either the grizzly or the polar bear. And yet, if you look at the skull, it has a very pugnacious snout. It doesn't really match any bear living today. And not directly, it doesn't directly match the cave bear. It's not a 1-for-1 comparison there. But it is a very interesting specimen. Could hybridization cause that? I don't know.
Than a polar bear or brown bears. In fact, the bear Merriam said most closely resembled MacFarlane's specimen was the giant short-faced bear. The giant short-faced bear is said to have gone extinct around 10,000 years ago, around the end of the last major ice age. These massive creatures could stand up to 12 feet tall on its hind legs and weighed over 1,600 pounds, making it one of, if not the, largest mammalian predator to have ever lived. These bears belong to the subfamily of Ursidae, the Tremarctinae, or short-faced bear family, where the only remaining members are the South American and Florida short-faced bears. The Arctodus was notable for its longer legs, longer more so than the modern North American bears, making it possibly the fastest bear of its time. There is also the noticeable short face, where the giant got its name. With its massive size and speed, the giant short-faced bear remained unchallenged as the apex predator it was, until its supposed extinction towards the end of the last ice age. But if other bears like the brown bear, polar bear, and black bear could have survived, could the giant short-faced bear have as well? With a small population once living in the
All right, so here's my take on that one. If you're going to pick a place for the giant short faced bear to have survived, I would look more in like the Altiplano South American region, but I can't give you a specific reason why I wouldn't expect to see them in the sub Arctic region. It's just I wouldn't expect to myself. I figure there's less to eat up there, but there are a lot of bears up there, so maybe not. I don't know.
vast wilderness of northern Canada or Alaska? Or perhaps, more realistically, could its descendants have bred and evolved into an entire new species of bear altogether? After all, reports of these giant bears have gone on for centuries, both from the Arctic explorers and the natives who have lived in these territories for thousands of years. Was MacFarlane's bear actually the great descendant of the giant short-faced bear? Merriam, who had helped bring to light the short-faced bear in the first place, certainly thought the MacFarlane Bear was the long-lost descendant of those giants which once roamed North America. He was so confident that he decided to give MacFarlane's bear its own species and genus, the Vectolarctos inopinatus, or better known as the ancient unexpected bear. With sparse human population and seemingly
Could've got a better
endless
moniker,
miles of
bud.
wilderness, it seems possible that
You
undiscovered
should have called it the kill face bear, or I don't know, the honey bear. Let's give it a better PR name, man.
species of ancient
You're doing
bears
them dirty.
or new ones could exist without anyone ever knowing it. And that was exactly how people looked at MacFarlane's bear for decades, as it was a holotype, or the first collected specimen of its species. Many zoologists began to speculate that this strange tan-colored bear had gone extinct since 1864, or perhaps the two Inuit hunters inadvertently killed the last living members of its species. And the mystery fell to the wayside yet again. Few people
Now, keep in mind this short faced bear that was roughly half the size of a greater mastodon. Uh, Also run around at the same time when there were beavers the size of VW Beetles and great big armadillo type giant armadillos. Armadillo type giant armadillos. Giant armadillos. Anyway. All of those things kind of disappeared right around the same time humans showed up with their little pokey tools and just ate everything, I guess. I'm not sure how that went down. I don't know how you get from vast herds of great bison, extinct bison that are now extinct, to extinct bison and the little ones we got left. And it's always kind of bothered me when you look at the bison population. It looks very much like an invasive species, like something got loose over here that wasn't there before and is there now, but there's nothing there to remove it except us. I don't know.
people knowing about this unexpected, unexplained species of bear perhaps roaming the Arctic tundra. And just as it had in 1918, the mystery was brought back to the limelight in 2006. American hunter Jim Martell was on a guided hunting expedition near Nelson Head, which lies on the southern end of Banks Island. The party saw a strange bear, and Martell aimed his rifle, most of them thinking nothing of it. Martell pulled the trigger and killed the bear almost instantly. On approach, everyone on the expedition quickly realized that what they had shot was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. What Martell had shot was the first ever recorded case of a polar bear and grizzly bear hybrid found in the wild. It had tannish-colored fur and dark brown circles around its eyes. Its claws were also long, like a grizzly, with a signature humped back. DNA testing confirmed the theory and shocked zoologists around the world. Dubbed the Pizzly by the media, this bear showcased just how close polar bear and grizzly bear territory had come with the advent of global warming. But as the saying goes, where there is one...
Am I the only person that feels like there should be like a major, like, symphony drop every time someone says the words global warming? Bum, bum, bum.
There will always be another. Are there more grizzly polar bear hybrids roaming the Arctic tundra? With the wild Pizzly's discovery, many researchers reopened MacFarlane's bear and quickly discovered remarkable parallels. First, and most notable, was the tan fur both Martel's bear and MacFarlane's shared. Next were the reported long claws and the dark brown fur around their eyes. It was not hard for zoologists to start arriving at the conclusion that what Merriam had thought was an entirely new species of bear was in fact a polar grizzly hybrid, which
But this brings into the question whether or not we have a liger-tigon situation or something similar, because there's nothing saying that it had to have crossed with a grizzly, or at least the MacFarlane bear. But it's most likely to have been either an eastern or western coastal brown bear or grizzly is the most likely bear it crossed with, as far as MacFarlane's bear is concerned. But the extremely pugnacious face kind of lends itself to a different description. So in the event of a liger, it is a tiger, a lion mother, and a tiger father. But if you flip it over, you get a tigon. The liger grows until it dies. The tigon doesn't get as big as either the lion or the tiger. And both of them are sterile and cannot reproduce. So here's my question. Is it possible that the MacFarlane's bear was a female polar bear, male grizzly bear, and the other two that we end up coming across were the other way around? And would that matter, do you reckon? Man, bear, pig is next. Okay.
begs the question, if this has been happening at least since 1864, could Merriam be correct, not in his conclusions, but his decision in giving these bears its own genus and species? The Smithsonian gave Dr. Blaine W. Schubert of East Tennessee State University rare access to the MacFarlane Bear remains. He quickly and almost dismissively labeled the bear. He was 100% sure that the skull was that of a young female brown bear. While he was convinced that the MacFarlane Bear was not a polar grizzly hybrid, but a full brown bear, others remained skeptical. Currently, the most popular explanation for MacFarlane's bear is that it was, indeed, a polar grizzly hybrid, and not a long-lost relative to the giant short-faced bear. Others remained more skeptical, with most of these scientists thinking the bear had simply gone extinct since 1864. But what these theorists point to regularly was once the vast distances between grizzly, brown bear, and polar bear habitats.
Exactly.
While yes, global warming has resulted in mainly...
Well, I was kind of getting at the idea that perhaps the growth limiting factor in the genes are carried on different alleles in polar bears versus grizzlies. Or perhaps if you can figure out what breeds do carry it on different alleles, you might be able to find out what the MacFarlane's bear was. Because what we're looking at appears to be what in genetics is referred to as a throwback feature. The pugnacious face has been featured in bears before. It's not even that unusual. They exist in bears today, but the bears in which the pugnacious nose exists are all in southern Florida and South America. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. But the featured does exist in the genetic record, and so it's possible for a throwback to have occurred. And if that feature is in association with some type of size management gene, okay. Or maybe it was an especially healthy version of it. I don't know.
Polar
Well
bears
fed.
venturing south, such as the case in Fort Yukon, a spot 10 times outside the normal range of polar bears, where one was nevertheless shot, that territory was much wider in 1864. If even today zoologists consider polar grizzly hybrids as being next to zero, how much more slim were the chances almost 160 years ago? Perhaps the Ventularctos inopinatus does exist to this day, a small population still alive, terrifying the indigenous life as an apex predator. Perhaps it died off from natural causes, or interbreeding, or loss of territory due to global warming. What can be said is that the MacFarlane Bear remains one of the largest mysteries in the bear research world, and will likely never be truly solved. Yet, without a doubt, this bear did exist, even if only in this one odd specimen, making MacFarlane's bear the rarest bear to have ever walked the earth.
Exactly. I think that's a pretty good approach on a documentary. That dude does excellent work, and I like almost everything he puts up. AN Productions. I'll go ahead and throw that link in chat. And he covers all kinds of weird stuff. So, Snark and Sass. What's up, Snarky? Nice, Mystery Bear. Nice. You're gonna love this
Whistle
next bit.
sticks were
Let me fix it. All right. So, what does the chat know about chocolate? So, I always found it weird that South America had some of the greatest flavorings in the history of the world and yet didn't put sugar with them. Most of the time, they enjoyed vanilla mixed with peppers and chocolate mixed with chilies. And they like really spicy stuff. They had this bit where they would mix chilies with ayahuasca and blow it into the nostrils, and you'd go off and trip and burn. And I don't know if I can approve of any of that type madness, but let me do this right. Hold up. This is Ancient Americas, and I've showcased a couple of his videos in the past. He does some of the absolute best American, like pre-Columbian based documentary style anything. Like everything he touches turns to gold as far as I'm concerned. And I was absolutely blessed to come across this guy when he only had like 60 or 70 subscribers. I come in on almost his first or second video and was immediately in love. Not really here. Welcome in. How you doing? We're going to look into chocolate. How do we feel about chocolate? You like chocolate? Does anybody here not like chocolate? Danny Staten, good to see you, bud. You almost snuck through without me noticing you. How about that? Okay, so if you don't like chocolate, throw a 1 in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you like chocolate. I prefer vanilla ice cream. But the reason I prefer vanilla ice cream is because it can be anything I want it to be. So I like vanilla ice cream with a chocolate drizzle on top, so I can make a little bit of chocolate, really, really super chocolate in the top, and then eat down to the clean vanilla, and it's absolutely amazing. Hey, Jot. Welcome in, bud. Good to see you. All right, so this dude's pretty much going to take us through the development of the chocolate bean from something that was initially used as a peripheral flavoring to something that literally became the direct representational symbol of power. Some of these Mesoamerican deities, or actually Mesoamerican kings, utilized the control of chocolate to control their citizens. Anyway, he gets all into it, and it's a really, really, really good one. Wax eating? I don't eat wax. I try not to anyway.
This episode is brought to you by the channel patrons who suggested and voted on this topic. This was a very enjoyable episode to make, and there is a part of me that is very sad to be done with it now. If you, dear viewer, would like to support the show and
Lawless,
suggest
I
and
said,
vote
hey,
on
Mitch,
topics,
good
you
to
can
see
do
you,
so
bud.
on Patreon. Also, special thanks to Atlas Altera for helping with the map for this episode. He's got a new video on his channel discussing the origins of different drinks around the world, chocolate among them, so give it a look after this episode. And now, back to our regularly scheduled program.
Dun,
Chocolate.
dun, dun.
I love it, you love it. We all love chocolate. Whether it's a chocolate cake for dessert, chocolates on Valentine's Day, oven-fresh chocolate chip cookies, or a cup of hot cocoa on a cold day, it's near and dear to all of us. Having a bad day? Treat yourself to some chocolate ice cream. I can hardly do justice to the impact chocolate has had on world cuisine. Although most of us think of chocolate as a sweet flavor or candy, for most of its history, it's been a bitter but flavorful drink, often reserved for specific groups in society. Chocolate is...
All right, so our first introduction to chocolate comes in the containers that it was either brewed or boiled in when they were processing it into the various methods that they would use to drink it. And this seems to have been done in a very similar process, kind of the way we do coffee today. Darker roasts, lighter roasts, unique roasts made by specific people in very specific ways. And these people who learned to make chocolate in ways that people liked it, much like Starbucks, became virtual stars in their own field. So keep that in mind. The ability to make a good chocolate drink could render you a god in Mesoamerica.
It has always had a huge cultural impact wherever it's been introduced, and Mesoamerica was no exception. They could never get enough of it. They were as crazy about it back then as we still are today. Let's explore the fascinating but often overlooked history of chocolate in the pre-Columbian Americas.
I love his work. It's excellent. It really is. The food of the gods.
To discuss the origins of chocolate, we need to talk about the cacao tree, Theobroma cacao.
Right? No, wait, hold on. Where is Swiss Miss? She should be here. Chocolate's a hell of a drug. Right? Could you imagine people pulling like organized crime capers for the great chocolate industry of Mesoamerica? You know it had to have happened. We're going to corner the market.
And for those of you who are intrigued by the name of this episode, all I did was translate the scientific name, because frankly, it's perfect. Theobroma, in its original Greek, means food of the gods, a very appropriate name. But back to the tree itself. The cacao tree is a small understory tree, never exceeding 8 meters or 26 feet. Being a tropical plant, it requires very exact conditions to thrive and will only grow in hot, moist conditions within 20 degrees north or south of the equator. Should anything like frost or drought interrupt these conditions, the tree will not be able to thrive. Another condition that is often underappreciated by cacao growers are the midges that pollinate the tiny flowers produced by the tree. They are vital to the life of the cacao tree. Where midges fare poorly, so does the cacao tree. Once a tree is planted, it usually takes about 3 to 4 years for the tree to bear its fruit, the cacao pods. Cacao pods come in a variety of colors. The pods are cauliflorous, which means that they sprout on the trunk and larger branches. If you're used to seeing fruits like apples, pears, and oranges on the ends of tree branches, these look almost alien, like something out of a cheap sci-fi film from the 60s. And if you think that's weird, just wait until you open them up, because it doesn't look anything like chocolate in there. The cacao beans are encased in a slimy, fleshy pulp. Just to get it out of the way, cacao beans are actually seeds and not technically beans. They're called beans because of their size and shape, and I'm going to be calling them beans in this episode. Just don't get confused, and remember to be careful around your more pedantic friends.
Okay,
the cacao tree relies on...
I'm going to take a look at vanilla in the next show, and I kind of feel like I should have put it all together, but some of these things are fairly closely related: coffee, vanilla, cocaine, and chocolate. It's no coincidence that almost all of these come from South America. I'm not positive coffee's from South America, but I think so. It might be from Africa. Somebody check on that for me, please. I'm dying to know.
On animals and humans to disperse the seeds. It has no way of naturally opening and dispersing the seeds itself. Bad
Okay, Scrappy Dreams. I don't necessarily disagree. If you've ever gone to your mom's freaking baking closet and got some of the powdered chocolate out and stuck your finger in it, it's extremely bitter. These people didn't mix it with sugar. They had access to the beet, sugar cane, and sweet corn, but never made actual sugar, and maple trees and various other types of trees that you can derive syrup from, but they never made sugar. And that strikes me as really wild.
Bats, rodents, and monkeys love cacao pods for the sweet pulp, but will avoid the bitter seeds and disperse them. The cacao beans get their bitter flavor from the presence of two alkaloids, theobromine and caffeine. These
Right.
chemicals are important not just to the
So,
chocolate, but
like all of these potted, very powerful psychotropics are all found in the South American rainforest. Go figure. It's almost as if somebody wandered through there and cut down everything that was useless and only left the good stuff. It's almost as if it's the largest managed food forest on the surface of the earth. Wonder how that could have happened.
also because they provide scientists with very important chemical markers, as we'll see later. Now, some of you may be wondering how you turn these curious cacao beans into the chocolate that we know and love. So let's take a small detour to discuss that. Chocolate has a very strict basic recipe that has not changed over thousands of years, and that recipe has 4 vital steps. Regardless of what kind of technology you have, any aspiring chocolatier is going to follow these. The first step is fermentation. In this step, the beans are removed from the cacao pod and left outside to ferment. Fermentation lasts for 3 to 6 days,
I got one for you. So, in South America, where they grow the older versions, the more genetically diverse versions of the coffee plant, there is an animal called the civet. A civet occasionally will stalk through the coffee fields in the hunts of mice and voles and rats and stuff. And in the process of going through, they will also eat coffee beans. The farmers in the area track the civets and follow them in order to pick up the poop that the civets have pooped out so that they can make an extremely rare type of coffee that is probably the most expensive drink on earth.
depending on the type of cacao and local conditions. During this time, 2 important things happen. First, the pulp on the seeds liquefies and falls off. Second, the seeds germinate but are killed by the high temperatures and acidity, which is what produces the chocolate flavor. This is key because ungerminated seeds will not produce a chocolate flavor. Once the fermentation is complete, the beans are dried out for 1
Yeah,
to 2
okay.
weeks where they lose more than half their weight. After drying, the
So it's
beans
in
are roasted
Africa
for
that the
70 to
civet lives. How about
115
that?
minutes, which helps
That kind of
produce the
makes sense.
flavor and aroma that we love so much. The last step is winnowing, in which the thin shell of the bean is removed. With this last step complete, the beans can be ground into powder and made into chocolate. Easy peasy. Now back to the cacao tree itself. Theobroma cacao has 2 subspecies, Criollo and Forastero. Criollo, grown historically in Mesoamerica, is characterized by long, soft, warty pods with deep ridges. It's more disease prone and produces less cacao than the Forastero variety, but its cacao beans and resulting chocolate have been considered to be of superior quality. On the
What's
other
up,
hand, the
Andrew? Welcome in.
Forastero,
Good to
which is
see you.
historically grown in South America, produces harder, rounder, melon like pods and is hardier and more productive. Technically, there is a third variety, Trinitario, which is a crossbreed of both subspecies that was first produced in the Caribbean in the 18th century. Speaking of geography, let's talk about where exactly cacao is found. Traditionally, the cacao tree is grown in northern South America, throughout Central America, and in the area of southeastern Mexico. But scientists are still uncertain how much of this range is actually natural. There's a lot of debate on the natural range and spread of the cacao tree. It's actually been a bit difficult to tease out because there's a lot of wild varieties that can't always be distinguished from domesticated trees that escaped back into the wild. That said, however, the general consensus is that the cacao tree's origins lie in the upper Amazon basin, because that's where the most genetic diversity among cacao trees are found, and where most of its close relatives are located. Most have interpreted this lack of genetic diversity among cacao trees in Mesoamerica as a result of its more recent arrival in the area, though some scholars disagree.
Tread upon peccaries? Tread upon by peccaries. As in the collared peccary, as in a javelina? Why are we talking about peccaries? I don't understand.
How the tree made its way from its Amazonian cradle to the rest of Central America and Mexico is an unresolved debate, and there's a few theories. One theory states that the cacao tree was taken out of South America and moved north by humans after it was first domesticated. Others have proposed that the tree spread naturally, or with humans northwards along trade routes, and then was later domesticated in Mesoamerica. Still others propose that it was domesticated twice, once in Mesoamerica and once in South America. I don't want to get bogged down in the weeds on this issue, otherwise we'll be here all day, and we've got a lot to cover.
I got time.
Check out the bibliography if you want to read up on it. For now, let's discuss its relationship with humans. As I mentioned before, cacao fruits contain a tasty pulp that attracts animals, and this is probably what initially enticed humans. This pulp can be made into a fruit beverage, or can be fermented into an alcoholic drink. Even today, it's not uncommon in Brazil to find shops selling juices made from the cacao pulp. Other medicinal uses of the cacao tree and its fruit have been documented by ethnographers in South America. Similar uses for the cacao tree's closest relative, the jaguar tree, are also very well documented. If we look at archaeology, the earliest known cacao use comes from the Mayo Chinchipe culture in modern-day Ecuador about 5,000 years ago, although in this instance, it's believed to have been wild cacao. As much as ancient people in South America enjoyed the cacao fruit, there's no evidence that they were ever creating chocolate before colonization. In case you're wondering why cacao beans never took off in South America, especially when it's a ready source of caffeine, it's probably due to the fact that the ancient people of South America had access to more stimulants that required less processing than the cacao bean.
In other words, those South American folks, they was jacked up from the word jump.
Such as coca, yerba mate.
I'm not immature, and I always laugh at the word peccaries too. That's why I brought it up. But I like the word javelina more because it has a foreign flavor. Peccaries, javelina.
And guayusa, to name a few. That's the benefit of living next to the Amazon, nature's biodiversity superstore. For the people in Mesoamerica, cacao was a game changer. Once the domesticated cacao tree reached Mesoamerica, it took off. Recent research indicates that cacao was likely domesticated roughly 3,600 years ago, most likely around the Pacific coastal plains of Chiapas. This area, the Soconusco, would later be famous for its high-quality chocolate production, although today it's actually a big coffee-producing region. The earliest evidence of chocolate production and consumption come from this region and date to about 1800 to 1400 BCE. This culture, referred to in archaeology as the Bara phase, was made up of maize farmers eking out a living on the coastal plains. However, their elegant pottery shows that not only were they storing and drinking chocolate, but also that they were treating this as a prized product. Now, some of you thoughtful viewers may be wondering how archaeologists can prove that chocolate was being drunk back then. After all, these are very humid, wet tropical environments where organic material is going to age like milk before it disappears. As it turns out, scientists have figured out a wonderful way to detect chocolate by analyzing pottery. When chocolate is stored in a ceramic vessel, it leaves a chemical residue on the walls of the pot that can be analyzed for the presence of theobromine and caffeine, the alkaloids produced by the cacao bean that we mentioned earlier. This gives archaeologists an extremely reliable way to detect chocolate in the archaeological record. But back to our story. As instrumental as the Bara people were for inventing chocolate, the people who really deserve credit with selling chocolate to wider Mesoamerica are the Olmec. I've already discussed the legacy of the Olmec in Mesoamerica in a previous episode, and chocolate was one of the many Mesoamerican mainstays that they popularized. At the site of El Manatee, ceramics with traces of chocolate residue have been found dating to 1350 BCE. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the Olmec regarding chocolate,
Dan,
however,
if it weren't for easily amused nerds, I don't think I would have a channel, bro.
was the very word cacao. This word, cacao, or some variant of it, appears across Mesoamerica in many different languages and
Sasquatch
language
loves me.
families.
She brought coffee.
Linguists have traced this word to the ancient
Cacao.
Mishe-Zokian word kaka, or
Cacao.
kakawa. Although there is some debate on this, many scholars believe that this language, which was native to the Gulf Coast area, was probably spoken by the Olmecs themselves. Because of the Olmecs' cultural impact, many other Mesoamerican languages borrowed their words for various prestige items, including their word for chocolate. It's probably safe to say that chocolate was an easy sell for the Olmec because it took off in the rest of Mesoamerica and even beyond, as we'll see later. People could not get enough of this delicious drink. From the Olmec, chocolate spread across Mesoamerica, and from that point, we see chocolate appearing in different cultures. One culture that left us a lot of evidence of early chocolate consumption was the Maya. So let's turn our attention there. Recent archaeological studies date the earliest cacao use among the Maya to about 600 BCE. Unfortunately, most of the early evidence for cacao consumption is biased towards the elite because they were the ones writing the books. As a result, our knowledge of how common Maya people consumed cacao during ancient times is poor, although we know from archaeology that common people did have access to it. For the elite, chocolate was an important beverage in feasting rites and rituals. It's not hard to find court scenes with chocolate in Maya art, especially in painted ceramics. This image here represents the earliest depiction of chocolate being made. If you're wondering why it's being poured this way, it's to build up a foam, which was very desirable, not just to the Maya, but to many Mesoamerican tastes. Many of these
Homies was ordering a mocha latte 2,000 years ago.
lavishly decorated drinking vessels were made specifically for drinking chocolate. And there's no ambiguity here because the Maya wrote exactly what they were for. Here's the Maya glyph for cacao that appears on so many of these vessels. For anyone who's curious
Andrew,
on how to
I
read
understand,
this, the fish
but
face
you might
stands
just
for the
have to get
syllable
over it
ka,
on this one.
and the two dots here mean that
I
the
can't
syllable is
fix
said
it.
twice. To the right of the fish is the symbol for wa, so this would literally spell kakawa, although literate Maya would have understood that very last vowel to be unspoken, which leaves cacao. I do want to note that the glyph can be written in other ways too, so it may not always look like this. These vessels contain a line of standard text that has been called the primary standard sequence that dedicates the drinking vessel to a person or god.
I don't know, man. I got one issue, and it's bothered me. That whole lack of the wheel thing, I don't know, bro. I mean, I don't know, bro. Sleds, okay. That's fine halfway across the Arctic, but there comes a point coming down through central Michigan where a sled stops being the most efficient way to move, and one of those Celtic wagons become a real good idea.
God lists the contents of the vessel and then closes with the name of the patron who commissioned the vessel. This sequence can refer to a number of foods and drinks intended to be served with these wares, but one of the most common drinks these inscriptions refer to is chocolate. These give us a glimpse into how these elite Maya prepared and drank their cacao. Many such texts describe different flavors or recipes, such as bitter cacao, tree fresh cacao, fruity cacao, or foamy cacao. This is a good time to point out that chocolate wasn't just a single drink. It was a drink that could be prepared in many different ways with many different flavorings and served at different temperatures, though it's likely that it was often served hot. Just think of how many types of coffee we have today, and that should give you an idea. These jars and cups would have been prestige items and symbols of political connections and patronage, but they are also commonly found in elite tombs as burial goods.
Okay, so they had chocolate producers that were so famous that they had their own brands and own types. And then they had people who ran around and regulated what could call themselves what, so that you didn't have like Nike shoes over here making Nike chocolate in your brand name, right? And that's wild. And all these little vessels that are made are parts of branding their own version of a chocolate drink. What's up, Derek? Good to see you, bud. Welcome in.
Cacao was one of the foods and drinks that would sustain the dead in the afterlife. A good example comes from the site of Rio Azul in modern-day Guatemala. Here, an undisturbed royal tomb, Tomb 19, was excavated in 1984, and several jars and vessels were recovered, and they tested positive for chocolate. As far as the Maya were concerned, you could take it all with you, even your chocolate. Just a side note here.
Okay, so here's another tier of value that is hard to judge. The most valuable things are traded. and quite often they're traded far. But when the most valuable thing you have is also a consumable, it becomes more valuable the farther away you get from the source, right? So even if chocolate made it as far north as Texas, you might find no actual residue or reference to it because the chance that the one jug that had some chocolate in it was saved in anywhere at all would be excessively rare. So, yeah.
One of the more interesting cacao vessels found in this tomb was actually a lidded vessel with a screw top lid. This is long before screw-on lids ever took off anywhere else. I thought it was cool and worth mentioning. But cacao had far deeper mythological significance to the Maya.
Can I point out that a screw top lid for Mesoamerica, 2,000 years before the birth of Christ is fucking interesting? And I did not know until I watched this video. I had no clue that some really clever asshole out there had made a screw top lid in clay and fired it. Challenge.
Cacao had a special prominence among fruit trees to the Maya, and it pops up in a lot of religious art. Cacao even had its own divine patron, Ekchua. Colonial sources reported that offerings involving feathers and sacrificed dogs were made in the month of Muan to him. However, the most famous god with connections to cacao is actually the maize god. If you want to know more about the maize god, the hero twins, and their adventures, I'd recommend checking out my video on the Popol Vuh, the Maya creation myth.
Another excellent
In that
video,
story,
dude.
as colonial sources recorded it, the severed head of the maize god, Hunhunapu, was hung in a calabash tree by the lords of the underworld. However, there are depictions of this scene from pre-colonial times that show his head hung in a cacao tree.
Yeah, honey.
For those that
It does. It was Pit and Pat, bro. We can find zero evidence of them utilizing any form of animal propelled anything. The llamas were used to carry stuff. We know that, but not very much. Other than that, dogs were sometimes packed up and used to carry stuff, but we can find no reference or examples of wheels being used in the New World, except in the form of toys in some cases, which would imply that they understood the concept but simply chose not to use it. Maybe it was wrong. It's round, a cursed shape.
remember the rest of the story,
Definite
he
flat
magically
earthers.
impregnates a daughter of one of the Lords of Death, and she gives birth to the hero twins, Hunapu and Shibalanke, who eventually return to the underworld and resurrect their father. Other ancient depictions of the maize god's death and resurrection show his lifeless body in the underworld sprouting various fruit trees, cacao among them. These newly sprouted trees come under the patronage of god El, one of the gods of the underworld, and although he's more commonly associated with merchants, he's often displayed with cacao. Once the maize god was resurrected by his twin sons, they brought cacao and the other fruits to the surface for all of mankind. In fact, there are depictions of the maize god that show him as the world tree, sprouting cacao pods. Thus, cacao was a symbol of death and rebirth to the ancient Maya. The Maya were well-experienced cacao cultivators who managed to grow it not just in their tropical backyard, but also in the northern Yucatan. Remember, the cacao tree needs a very wet and humid environment to flourish, and the northern Yucatan is very dry, so this is much more impressive than it initially sounds. To do
Yeah,
this,
no.
they planted cacao
We-
trees in sinkholes and cenotes.
To this day, we have issues trying to grow chocolate that is consistently good. And quite often we end up having to have vast fields of chocolate so that we can mix the qualities together to make the quality we're after, kind of like whiskeys. But yeah, no, it's not an easy thing to do, and the quality can change quite a bit from year to year based on weather, wind, sun, that kind of stuff.
These areas had enough moisture to allow the trees to grow. Very ingenious. Now, the Maya were not the only people in Mesoamerica at this time who were enjoying and cultivating chocolate. Cultivation could be found further south and east in Central America. Other noted areas include the Azalcos area of modern El Salvador and the greater Nicoya region of Nicaragua and Costa Rica. the latter representing the southern limit of pre-colonial cacao production as far as archaeology and history can tell. In these areas on the fringe of Mesoamerica, cacao assumed similarly important cultural and economic functions, although it never became an export product as we'll see in other areas. There is some debate about whether cacao was introduced by later Nahuatl migrants, but there's some pretty compelling evidence that cacao production in these areas predates those migrations. But demand for cacao wasn't limited to the restricted environment where it was cultivated. It had a very wide appeal and was in high demand in other areas. That meant that many in Mesoamerica, if not most, who wanted cacao had to trade for it. The desire for chocolate fueled a booming trade that stretched the length of Mesoamerica and beyond. The Patun Maya in the Terminal and Post Classic were famous traders who could move goods across Mesoamerica by canoe or by foot, and they likely played a large role in moving cacao into the highlands of central Mexico. But cacao didn't stop in central Mexico. Cacao was traded as far away as the American Southwest. Ceramic analysis has shown that the Hohokam and the inhabitants of Chaco Canyon both had access to chocolate despite being well over 1,000 kilometers away from the nearest cacao tree. Cacao was truly the crude oil of its day in Mesoamerica. In fact, chocolate and cacao beans were so desired in Mesoamerica that they became a de facto currency. Cacao beans could be traded for just about anything in ancient times. This might sound odd, but it was actually more practical than you might think. Not only were they universally prized, but their small size and large quantities allowed for small transactions. A few beans could buy you something small. Not only that, cacao beans were durable and could be stored for years without spoiling. In the 16th century, Conquistador Hernando de Oviedo y Valdez reported that in Nicaragua, a rabbit could be bought for 10 cacao beans and a slave for 100 beans, give or take. Over in Tlaxcala, colonial records report that a good turkey hen could be expected to sell for 100 beans, a turkey egg for 3 beans, a ripe avocado for 3 beans, and a large tomato for 1 bean. The Spanish even reported that Montezuma II had warehouses of over 900 million cacao beans. If you wanted to be rich in Mesoamerica, you invested in cacao beans. It was all about the Benjamins. For those who want a much better joke, this one gets repeated often by archaeologists and scholars discussing cacao as currency, and I can't resist repeating it here. Mesoamerica was the only place in history where money literally grew on trees. Oh, and just like any other currency out there were counterfeit cacao beans. Spanish chronicler Bernardino de Sahagún reported during colonial times that counterfeiting was common among the Aztecs, and we quote,
"The bad cacao seller sells cacao beans which are placed in hot ashes, toasted, made full in fire. He counterfeits by making fresh cacao beans whitish. He places them in hot ashes, steers them into hot ashes, then treats them with chalk, with chalky earth, with wet earth. He steers them into wet earth, with amaranth dough, wax, avocado pits, broken into pieces which are then shaped like cacao beans. He counterfeits cacao. He covers this with cacao bean hulls. He places this in the cacao bean shells. The whitish, the fresh cacao beans, he intermixes, mingles, throws in, introduces, ruins with the shrunken, the chili seed-like, the broken, the hollow, the tiny. Indeed, he throws in with them the wild cacao beans to deceive the people."
Proof that some things never change. And speaking
I would really love to know who he got to read that, because that dude's accent was magnificent.
of the Aztecs, if there's one culture that can inform us a lot about Mesoamerican chocolate use, it's them. Now, when I say Aztecs, I mean the Mexica, who were one of the many Nahuatl-speaking ethnic groups in central Mexico at Spanish contact. These groups, by most accounts, were actually recent migrants, likely having traveled around the 13th century from the Bajío region into central Mexico. There, they adopted existing traditions of city building, statehood, and culture, including cacao use. The Mexica were
Remind me
among
to
the
take a
latest
look
of
at,
these Nahuatl groups to settle down when they found
Remind me to take a look at Viracocha later, because they all have myths of some great white-bearded deity that showed up and showed them how to do stuff, which really trips me out.
their city of Tenochtitlan, but it would go on to become the largest city in the pre-Columbian Americas and the head of what we know as the Aztec Empire. Depending on your definition, many or all of those other Nahuatl groups and states could be considered
Hello,
Aztec,
M's
even the
Mad
ones
World.
not
Welcome
inside
in.
the Aztec Empire, and that empire also included groups which weren't Nahuas at all. But just to keep things simple, and for the purposes of this video, when I say Aztec, I mean Mexica. The point is that when the Mexica arrived and settled down in the area, they fully embraced chocolate. The Aztecs, and all the inhabitants of central Mexico for that matter, used the same tried and true techniques for turning cacao beans into chocolate that we discussed earlier. Like their Maya contemporaries, they also appreciated a good head of froth on their chocolate, which they achieved by repeatedly pouring chocolate back and forth, as seen in this illustration here. By the way, some of you who are familiar with chocolate making in Mexico today may be wondering if molinillos or swizzle sticks were used to create the foam, and those appear to be a later Spanish invention, although a few colonial sources mention stirring spoons used by the Aztecs. Most sources state that the Aztec took their chocolate cold, unlike their Maya counterparts who reportedly drank it hot. However, we also know that different brews were served at different
All right,
temperatures
hold
based
up.
on the
That's a
ingredients and
distinction.
preparation.
Okay. So while we do know that temperature speaking, different cultures drink it different. It would be like the difference between hot chocolate and chocolate milk. But there's also another tier here that most people don't consider. They used peppers, heavy spices in with their chocolates. Various seeds would be ground up in like a poultice type tea and added to the roasted chocolate drink. And whether or not it was a spicy hot or a temperature hot seems to be hard to decipher from some of the early Jesuit texts that we do have on it. Because the language that they were using didn't generally distinguish the concept of spiciness.
It's suspected that the reason the cold serving temperature is often referenced for Aztec chocolate is due to the humoral attributes that the Spanish later ascribed to it. Colonial sources also distinguish between fine chocolate, tlaquetzali, and an inferior type that was mixed with maize to make a chocolate-flavored gruel. Speaking of additives, the Aztecs had their own recipes for making cacao and chocolate with a variety of different ingredients. We should note that not all of these ingredients were used to enhance flavor. Some of these had medicinal uses rather than culinary uses. One popular ingredient for chocolate was, of all things, ground powdered chili peppers, which produced a drink called chilcacahuat. That may sound a bit weird, but Michael and Sophie Coe in their seminal book,
Yes.
The True History.
Absolutely. That is the Mayan Pictoscript. What's up, LBG? Motherfucking LBG. What's up, bud? And yeah, it's an actually a very distinctive language that isn't completely translated, but wasn't sufficiently translated up until like a few years ago.
Of chocolate informed the reader that they would make their own chocolate ice cream with chilies, and that the pairing of these flavors was excellent. So I got curious and decided to make my own chili-flavored chocolate drink by mixing unsweetened cocoa powder with chili powder in water, and it was actually much better than I expected. But let's set aside my eccentrics and get back on track here. Another very popular
Can I
flavor
point
was the
out
dried...
that picture right there was giving me hives? That coffee cup is sitting on a book, and that makes my skin crawl.
By mixing unsweetened cocoa powder with chili powder in water, and it was actually much better than I expected. But let's set aside my eccentrics and get back on track here. Another very popular flavor was the dried petals of the sacred ear flower, which the Aztecs would have called xochinacatzli. This added a spicy flavor.
Okay, so here's an interesting point. The detail in which some of these descriptions of the chocolate drinks is vastly variable. The recipes are sometimes given very, very specifically, and sometimes it's so and so's chocolate over there. It would be like trying to go to Coca-Cola and get their recipe, or Dr. Pepper or something like that. And so it's like, well, we served this type of chocolate drink, but the elites got Marco's. They ordered out. They got some DoorDash.
flavor to the chocolate that later Spanish compared to black pepper, nutmeg, allspice, and cinnamon. Another common spice used for flavoring that I think most listeners will appreciate was vanilla, which was native to the tropical lowlands and a very desired import in its own right. Another sweet ingredient that could be added was honey. Other additives could include crushed ceiba seeds, mecachochit, allspice, acuyo, mame sapote, and Mexican magnolia. And that's not even a comprehensive list.
I've read everything I could get my hands on up until I had my reconstruction done and it moved my eyeball. And then I went to audiobooks.
There's also some evidence that alcohol may have been mixed with chocolate because our old friend Bernardino de Sahagún noted that excesses of chocolate could intoxicate the drinker, which would only be possible if alcoholic or psychotropic ingredients were added. There's also some evidence that the Aztecs ate chocolate in a solid form, but the sources are vague, so it's uncertain whether this refers to some sort of confection or the beans themselves. The main takeaway here is that the Aztecs could take their chocolate in one of many satisfying and refreshing ways. Unfortunately, when I say Aztecs, I actually mean the Aztec elites because they considered chocolate to be a drink reserved for the upper classes. We aren't certain if this was common for other peoples of the empire. Chocolate may have been more available for other cultures, and there's some evidence to corroborate that, but no one is certain. For the Aztec elite, however, it was synonymous with cultured refinement. In fact, according to Nahuatl traditions, cacao was a legacy from the Toltecs and was bestowed on them by Quetzalcoatl, not the god, mind you, but the mythical, legendary, and possibly historical man and Toltec ruler, Seacatopiltzin Quetzalcoatl, who, it was said, discovered cacao of different colors. Just an FYI, you'll sometimes see people on the internet say that Quetzalcoatl gave chocolate to humanity against the god's wishes, like Prometheus with fire. However, in all my research, I could not find a primary source for this, and I suspect that this has come from someone conflating Quetzalcoatl the man with Quetzalcoatl the god. Darn Toltecs making trouble for us again. If anyone knows a primary source for this, let me know in the comments. For Aztec poets, chocolate was the ultimate symbol of luxury and sensuality. For the elites, chocolate would have been an important part of high society and feasting. It was typically served at the end of a meal after everyone had eaten, much like some people will do coffee after dessert.
I went a slightly different route. I collected Heinlein books, Arthur C. Clarke, Pierce Anthony, Stephen King, Isaac Asimov, all of those.
Prominent figures at these feasts would sip their chocolate from gourd or calabash cups, while the lesser guests drank from ceramic cups. One other group that had access to chocolate was warriors. Moctezuma I had ruled that those who did not go to war could not consume chocolate or other rare foods. This stuff was off limits to the common people unless they were willing to suit up for military service. I know that we don't typically think of chocolate as a martial and masculine food, but the Aztecs thought so, and it was an important part of military rations. Chocolate was baked into a wafer that could be carried in a pack with other foods. Not a bad army ration if I do say so myself. However, if there's one class that we need to highlight in this discussion about the Aztecs and chocolate, it's the Posteca. Who were the Posteca, you ask? The Posteca were a small special group of long-distance merchants who would facilitate commerce and...
Okay, so there are these two books. One was written by Dean Koontz. The other was written by Pierce Anthony. And later, we'll skip that one for the moment. The Dean Koontz book was named Phantoms. And the Pierce Anthony book was named Firefly. These plots are identical. They're the same story told by two different authors, and I can't help but think that these guys sat down and had a conversation with each other after a writers' conference somewhere, because they were released within like a year and a half of each other, if I remember right.
Communication beyond the empire's borders. The Spanish actually wrote a lot about the Posteca, and as interesting as they are, we can't go into all of it here, so we're going to keep this cursory and stick to the parts that pertain to chocolate. Posteca traders were invaluable in bringing prized exotic foreign goods into the marketplaces of the empire. Among these goods would have been resplendent feathers, jaguar pelts, amber, and of course, cacao beans. You might have noticed that these goods have a tropical vibe to them, and that's not a coincidence. We mentioned earlier how cacao was widely traded outside of its tropical home, and the Pochteca were heavily involved in this trade, journeying to the Soconusco to bring back chocolate. Many became
All right. If you want to talk about horrors and Stephen King has an unsettling sense of horror. His horror gets at your existential concept of reality. It peels at it around the edges, and it does it typically through some very understandable, very premise bound physics, but not always. One of his best works was removed from the libraries because it was deemed too controversial. The name of the book is Rage. He wrote it under Richard Bachman, and it's about a guy who has it up. If you've ever seen the movie Apt Pupil, it's similar to that, but it's much more school shooter vibe than, the Nazi white supremacist thing that dude in Apt Pupil had going on. This was more along the lines of like he was just angsty and angry. And I don't even know if you can find that book in stores anymore. I haven't seen it in years. The only copy I know of is either at my aunt's house or in storage. May have decomposed in the past 20 years. I don't know.
became fabulously wealthy from this trade, sometimes even rivaling the wealth of the nobility itself. Because the Pochteca were technically considered warriors because they were armed and sometimes were expected to fight, they could also consume chocolate and were noted connoisseurs of it, hosting large banquets to purchase social clout in Aztec society. In fact, chocolate was so desired by the Aztec elites that it fueled conquest. In 1486, Ahuitzot led the Aztec armies to the
Gangland
Soconusco
style.
and annexed it, the farthest province they ever conquered, and a very good one at that. Remember, this was the same area that saw the earliest recorded cacao production, so it had a long history of cacao cultivation. In many ways, this was the jewel of the empire, and chocolate was part of their tribute to the Aztecs. Interestingly, though, there was also some ambivalence to chocolate among the Mexica. See, they had once been poor, savage.
Not to leave Dean Koontz out in the cold on all that. He wrote two of my favorite books when it comes to like weird creepinesses. Phantoms, which is hilariously creepy. It's kind of dumb, but at the same time, it's got that real thingish sort of vibe going on. And Night Chills, which is it the way the horror gets in on you. That one is that they can tell you to forget, and you will. You'll never have any idea that anybody was screwing with you at all. It's nutty.
Warriors that had risen to glory by their courage and martial prowess. As Mexica rulers became increasingly urbane and rich from conquest, exotic luxuries flowed into Tenochtitlan. Many critics denounced the corrupting influence that these had on the Mexica. In their view, Mexica's strength had been a product of their austerity, and all this new luxury was making them lazy and soft. In their eyes, real men were supposed to drink pulque instead of that fancy sissy chocolate stuff. So yes, ancient Mesoamerica was not immune from the elderly complaining about the kids these days. Those musings aside, chocolate often became a symbol of Aztec decadence and excess. One story that really captures this well comes from the Spanish friar Diego Duran's The History of the Indies of New Spain. In this story, Duran records that Moctezuma I allegedly dispatched an envoy to Aztlan, the purported ancestral home of the Aztecs. Upon reaching Aztlan, the members of the envoy presented gifts to Coatlicue, the mother of Huitzilopochtli. Upon offering chocolate to the goddess, they were warned by an elder,
"You have become old. You have become tired because of the chocolate you drink and because of the foods you eat."
No. And Firefly is not the same as Firestarter. Firefly is about a ancient inhuman menace that has sat around the swamps of Florida for a millennia or 2 or 10, a few million years, until it finally decides to just eat everything. And it utilizes a pheromonic trigger that causes any mammal within scent range to become entranced and walk directly into it. and there's references that it may have actually wiped out the dinosaurs and stuff. It's a wild story. It's wild rod.
They have harmed and weakened you. You have been spoiled by those mantles, feathers, and riches that you wear and that brought you here.
Chocolate also had important ritual and symbolic functions among the Aztec. In the Codex Feovari Mayor, the Aztec cosmos is illustrated with 4 directions emanating from the center. Each direction has its own tree, and the south tree, pointing to the land of the dead, is none other than the cacao tree, next to which stands Mictlantecutli, the god of the dead and the ruler of the underworld. Atop the tree is a scarlet macaw, the bird of the hot lands from which the finest cacao came. Chocolate was also frequently linked to blood, and the cacao pod itself to the human heart, since both were repositories of precious and valuable liquids, blood and chocolate. One ingredient that I deliberately didn't mention earlier was achiote. The crushed seeds of this shrub produce a dye that would have given the chocolate a red and bloody appearance. In fact, the Aztecs even made a brew of chocolate called itzpacalat with human blood from a sacrificial knife. This was used for a special ritual in which a captive would impersonate Quetzalcoatl, the god this time, not the man, until he was due to be sacrificed. Upon hearing the news from the temple elders of his impending demise, he would drink the itzpacalat to allay his fears of death and to keep him from getting cold feet before the sacrifice. The Aztecs are a good example of just how deeply prized chocolate was. For them, it was a luxury reserved for the highest echelons of society, which is a stark contrast to what we saw in the more tropical regions of Mesoamerica, where chocolate was available to most people. It was deeply woven into mythology and culture, but chocolate was about to be changed forever by the arrival of the Spanish into the Americas. The first recorded European to actually encounter chocolate is none other than Christopher Columbus himself. During
Y'all
his
know that
fourth
guy.
voyage in 1502 off the coast of Honduras, Columbus came across and captured a massive trading canoe crewed by the Petun Maya. These people would have been completely different from the Caribbean inhabitants he had met on his earlier voyages, and this made him very curious. Among the cargo that Columbus inspected were cotton garments, war clubs, axes, copper bells, and cacao beans.
What's up,
His
Bosco
son
and George?
Ferdinand
How y'all
noted the
doing?
importance of cacao beans to these traders.
For their provisions, they had such roots and grains as are eaten in Hispaniola, and a sort of wine made out of maize, which resembled English beer. And many of those almonds, they seemed to hold these almonds at a great price. For I observed that whenever any of these almonds fell, they all stooped to pick it up, as if an eye had fallen.
Columbus, however, never got to taste chocolate. It wouldn't be until the conquest of Mexico that the Spanish would actually begin drinking it. Initially, the conquistadors were repulsed by chocolate as they were by most indigenous food. They found the bitterness unpalatable. However, as a class of Spanish native Creole,
All right, so Salem's Lot didn't bother me. It didn't really bother me, although it really unnerved my brother. He to this day does not like clowns. Gerald's Game, Misery, Sail in its own way. The book version of Sail has a bit more to it than the movie. And it implies like alien invasion type crap, like they're rewiring our brain to attack ourselves. I want to put together a show where I want to find like 3 people that have seen Leave the Earth. What is it? Leave the Earth Behind, Leave the World Behind. And I want to go through it and make an attempt to interpret like every scene as a picture style, because I think there's a lot of Easter eggs buried in there that I hadn't noticed yet. For some reason, when I started watching that movie, my wife came in about a quarter of the way through it, and I'd already been watching it for 2 hours, because I would watch a few minutes and I would stop to think about it, because there's a lot of subtext going on in that movie that's not above board. There's a lot of things doing that aren't said, and so it's not obvious why it's doing.
began to emerge, chocolate began to find appeal in Spanish circles, particularly among Spanish women who had emigrated from Spain. Now, the Spanish did not take chocolate wholesale from the Aztecs. Although they kept the same basic process for turning cacao beans into chocolate, they made some changes to the traditional chocolate recipes. First, they served their chocolate hot. This may have been an independent development, but it's possible that this may have been something that they learned from the Maya. Second, they sweetened the chocolate to cut the bitterness, most commonly with cane sugar. Third, they substituted Old World spices such as cinnamon, anise seed, and black pepper for the native spices that we discussed earlier. Lastly, they changed the method of creating froth from pouring the chocolate back and forth to using wooden molinillos or swizzle sticks. During the colonial period, chocolate and cacao continued to be important resources for the native populations inside and outside of Spanish control. Because cacao beans could be used as currency, the Spanish wasted no time in exploiting its value among indigenous people, even if they didn't drink chocolate themselves. During the Aztec conquest, conquistadors stole huge stores of cacao beans, knowing full well how valuable they were. After the conquest, it remained a highly sought after commodity both inside and outside of Spanish control. Remember what we said earlier: cacao was a perfectly acceptable means to pay the wages of native laborers. Even the Catholic Church got in on this action. If you ever go to the cathedral in Mexico City today, which, mind you, is right next to where the ancient Templo Mayor once stood, you might see this statue in the Capilla de San Jose, with offerings of cacao beans at its base. This statue, the Christ of Cacao, or Lord of Cacao, dates to the 16th century, and it was fashioned as a means for natives to offer.
Apparently, the writer of The Exorcist is William Peter Blatty. Born January 7th, 1928, died January 12th, 2017, was an American writer, director, and producer. He's best known for his 1971 novel The Exorcist and his 1973 screenplay for the film adaptation of the same name.
Up cacao beans as alms to the church. This was a useful source of income for the priests at the cathedral, and later records indicate that many monks in Mexico were avid chocolate drinkers.
Hold up now. You need to go take a real good look at Andromeda Strain and tell me whether the stand or Andromeda Strain matches more with the way you think that's going to play out. Andromeda Strain is terrifying because it's actually a completely natural disaster. It's not a man-made bug. It's just some shit that drifts down from a comet, eats all the plastic out of the world, and then stops.
Even unconquered indigenous producers remained very active in the cacao trade. The Itza Maya, who weren't fully subjugated by the Spanish until 1697, were avid cacao producers who used the cacao trade to enrich themselves and even competed with Spanish traders. Before we continue, I do want to take a detour and discuss the etymology of the word chocolate. You'll often hear that chocolate is a loan word from Nahuatl, and while that makes for a neat and tidy explanation, the truth, as it often is much more complicated and weird. What if I told you that no Aztec prior to the Spanish conquest ever used the word chocolate? But ancient America, as I hear you saying, that doesn't make any sense. Chocolate comes from the Nahuatl word chocolat, which means cacao water. As it turns out, that etymology is highly unlikely. Professional linguists will point out that the root choco doesn't exist in Nahuatl because the ch sound is never followed by an o. More importantly, though, the word chocolate or chocolat never appears in a single early source on the Nahuatl language or Aztec culture. Some people in the back might want to chime in and say that the original Nahuatl word isn't chocolat, but chocoat, meaning bitter water. While this is a better theory, it's still not likely because there'd be no linguistic reason for European speakers to change the sh to a ch sound and to insert an L. If you're curious what the original Nahuatl word for chocolate was, it was cacahuat, literally cacao water. Recall from earlier that cacao had been the pan-Mesoamerican word for chocolate since Olmec times. So where does the word chocolate come from? Spanish sources began using the word chocolate near the...
You realize these guys were a cow away from making the greatest dessert in history. Earlier, they were talking about mixing chocolate with corn and honey. And if that's not corn pudding, I don't know what to tell you.
The end of the 16th century. And it's worth noting that the Spanish were using this word, not the natives. How or where did they get choco? Tragically, no one is certain. One theory is that chocolate comes from the Nahuatl word chicoli, which means cacao beater, and that it somehow eventually morphed into chocoli and then got picked up as chocolate. Another idea is that the Spanish picked up their words for cacao not in central Mexico, but in the Yucatan, where the Mayan words chacao ha and chocol ha, both of which mean hot water, became the Spanish term for chocolate. But at some point, the Mayan ha was replaced by the Nahuatl at for water. Okay, that sounds a bit more plausible. Michael and Sophie Coe tackle this question from a different angle, and I think it's worth considering. They looked at why the Spanish would not have adopted the simple cacao root for chocolate. They point out that in Spanish, like many other Romance languages, caca is usually a childish term for feces, like how toddlers will use the word poo in English. It doesn't take much to imagine the Spanish being uncomfortable describing a bitter, frothy brown drink with the word caca. So there may have been a lot of incentive to settle on a different word for cacao, and one way or another, we got chocolate. Again, this is just a theory, but one in my opinion that merits consideration. I doubt we'll ever find the exact etymology of the word chocolate, but it's a subject that there's endless debate about. Now that that's out of the way, let's get back to the history. Once chocolate started getting exported back to Europe, it took off. Just as it had been a mainstay of Mesoamerican elite society, so chocolate went into the courts, palaces, and mansions of the European elite. By the early 17th century, it was becoming a common sight at the Spanish court. Originally used for medicinal purposes, it slowly caught on because of its flavor. There's actually a lot of interesting history about the incorporation of chocolate into the humoral theory of European medicine, as well as religious debates about whether or not it was sinful to consume chocolate. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that today, but if you're interested, check out the bibliography as always. From Spain, it spread to the rest of Europe, where it captured the hearts of everyone. Keep in mind that this is before coffee and tea had really taken off in Europe, so chocolate was king, and in fact, many people used to drink chocolate in the morning as a stimulant. In time, chocolate would eventually become a popular commodity and be turned from a drink into chocolate bars and candy that we're familiar with today. This is where familiar flavors and ingredients such as milk and nuts start getting added into the mix. Now, we aren't going to go into the more modern history of chocolate, nor the questionable ethics of the chocolate trade, which can be very exploitative and involve child slavery. It's pretty messed up and tragic. But if you're interested in that, there's plenty of well-made resources online. It's just that it's outside the focus of this channel. Whenever I've seen chocolate discussed in educational contexts, its ancient history usually gets little more than quick lip service. I hope that you can now appreciate what a rich history chocolate has. It's important to humans, the journey that chocolate makes from the tree to the cacao bean to chocolate. The next time that you pour yourself a nice cup of cocoa on a cold day, remember that you're enjoying a flavor that has a rich 3,000-year history, a delight that was beloved by kings and commoners alike. And that's going to wrap us up for today.
Right.
Hope you all enjoyed this episode on one of the great...
You're talking about a plant that grew in the same general vicinity of both cocaine and vanilla, and yet there's no mention of mixing cocaine with chocolate or really very much about mixing vanilla with chocolate. There's no attempt to trace vanilla through trade. We know it was traded. We don't really know how much. I don't know if anybody's doing a dissertation on that, but I would love to know, right? Like, it just seems really interesting to me. See what's next. Oh yeah, this dude. All right. So here's the funny thing. Here's why I put these two together. So some of the information derived from that previous video on chocolate is taken from one of the folks that went with this Conquistador. So it wasn't a total loss, but homie was pretty underhanded with everything that he did. This dude's as dirty as they come. I'll let these guys explain it, but just to do the thing with the thinginess. Yeah, there we go. Right. This is called Drawn of History, and they're not 100% like bona fide type actual, but they'll give you the right ideas if you catch my drift. Like, they don't specifically spell it out step by step, but in this case, they do a fairly detailed dive into what this dude did from the time he showed up until he managed to, I think, die here. I don't think he left. He may have. He may have made it back and then got court-martialed or something. I can't remember. But I'm pretty sure there's an ad in here, and I like this channel so much, I'm going to let it play.
Who was
Maybe.
the worst conquistador? Francisco Pizarro destroyed the Inca when he kidnapped their leader Atahualpa, held him for ransom, and once paid, killed him anyway. Hey, I thought we were good now. I even converted to Christianity. Oh, good thing too. You should see how we're executing the other guys. Nuno Beltran de Guzman, also known as Bloody Guzman, was so brutal to the native people of Mexico that he was basically brought up on war crimes. Do you know how messed up of a conquistador you have to be for that to happen? But isn't this what
Yeah, let's point out something. This guy was brought up on war crimes for the things he did in the Americas during the Spanish Inquisition. Like the same guys who were like, you're a witch. You've committed heresy. You spoke out against the church. You're a bad person. Turned and looked at him and said, dude, did you convert anyone? Most of them wouldn't convert, so we just burned them at the stake. That's evil. Well, isn't that what you do? Yeah, but we do it for the church.
conquistadors were? They were Spanish conquerors of the New World. So who was the worst at it? Who was the worst Españoles explora, most incompetent conquistadora?
Did that say real son bitches?
Pamphilio de Narvaez. Ahora, most incompetent. Isn't this what conquistadors were? They were Spanish conquerors of the New World. So who was the worst?
Some real son of bitches.
Who was the worst Españoles explora, most incompetent conquistadora?
All right, good to see you, bud. I appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
Narvaez. Europe in the 15th century was going through massive changes. The population was finally rebounding from the Black Death, the Renaissance was just taking shape, and the Byzantine Empire was about to fall. Another day of keeping the Ottomans at bay. Yep, this Eastern Roman Empire has stood for 1,000 years and will stand for 1,000 more. Did I remember to lock the gate?
No, you didn't. You had one job.
I guess not. The loss of the Byzantine Empire led to the trade between Europe and Asia grinding to a halt, as the Muslim Ottoman Empire was hesitant to allow European traders through. Come on, guys, we've been using this trade route for centuries now. What do you have against us?
No. You carry fleas.
Oh yeah, that old thing. Which meant that Asian goods that had been imported were now prohibitively expensive. Goods like silk and porcelain and spices, which may not seem like a big deal until you consider traditional European cuisine. Honey, this tastes like a foot that's been boiled in swamp water. And it's perfect. Chef's kiss. European kingdoms soon sought alternative trade routes to Asia, such as Portugal, which was spurred on by Prince Henry the Navigator and his lesser-known brother, Prince Charlie the backseat driver.
Right? Because everybody's got one of those guys in their family. I won't even get in the freaking car with my sister. She absolutely won't get in a car with me. I don't think we have ridden together in a car since she got her license. So there's that.
You're going too fast, and would it kill you to use a turn signal? Pull over. I have to pee. This led to Portugal trying to reach Asia by sailing south around Africa. Meanwhile, in the 1480s, King John II of Portugal was approached by a Genoese sailor who had a different strategy. I'll sail west.
Christopher Columbus, are you crazy? That'll never work.
Why? Because you think I'll sail off the edge of a flat Earth? Newsflash, the Earth is round!
No, duh. We've known that for almost 2,000 years. This is crazy because the map you're using by Toscanelli is garbage. You've underestimated the circumference of the Earth because you didn't convert Arabic miles to Roman miles. And did you forget that Portuguese mariners are already trying to sail around Africa?
You mean Bartholomew Diaz's expedition? He's been gone for 2 years. Probably at the bottom of the briny deep, if you ask me. I'm back, and I've...
All right, so as you can see, he takes an approach of history from a humorous perspective. And yeah, no, you kind of gotta take, this is a dark period in history, man. I mean, Every time a group of sailors landed from the New World, it brought a brand new batch of diseases that the locals didn't have anything to defend against. And so every single first contact that took place with fewer and fewer people on the receiving side, so to speak.
Successfully rounded the southern tip of Africa! God damn it, Diaz. You got the timing of a shark. Luckily, Portugal's Iberian neighbor of Spain, united by King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile, were more willing to take a shot on the Italian mariner, Captain Columbus. As you know, we have completed the Reconquista and driven the Moors out of Spain. And as loco pantalones as your plan is, we are ready to support it, mostly on the chance of establishing our own trade route to Asia, and a little bit to shut up King John of Portugal. That cabron talks more about Asia than Eurotrash coming back from...
So this whole entire exploration of what became the exploration of the New World was basically a big-ass flex. That's all it was. It was just a flex on the other kings of Europe.
Gap year. Also, you can bring Christianity to all the heathens you encounter, while we kick the Spanish Inquisition into high gear and crush the Jews, Muslims, and heretics that refuse the word of our Lord Jesus Christ. That doesn't sound very Christian to me. Who let this Jewish guy in here? So in 1492, Columbus was off.
And sometimes he goes a little hard. What can I say? I like it.
Him and everyone on his expedition should have died, but there just happened to be two undiscovered continents in the way. That is, undiscovered by people other than the 60 million already living there. Still, Columbus thought he had reached Japan, which was then known as Cipangu? Huh? This is Cipangu, the island off the coast of Asia. Yes or no? No Cipangu. No? Well, is that Cipangu? No, that Topanga. Whatever. Come on, boys. We've reached Asia. Oh, and you're Spanish and Christian now. Over the next decade, Columbus and other Spanish explorers would flock to what they believed was Asia, which in 1498 included a young man named Panfilo de Narvaez. How do you do, Captain Colombo?
All right. So enters our hero, a brave and debonair soul who only wishes to forward the goals of the church and his motherland.
Look around, kid. I'm Admiral of the frickin' Ocean Sea. And what brings you here? Well, I guess I've been identified as a young man of great potential, selected by the crown itself to conquer this strange and exotic land. Plus, it doesn't hurt that the kid's got more connections than Ma Bell. Ah, Juan de Esquivel. I haven't seen you since you were part of my second expedition. Is young Panfilo under your...
To quote the Beastie Boys, like Ma Bell, he's got the ill communication.
Or charge? Yeah, he's gonna be my bailiff. I'll show him the ropes of Conquistador and hopefully how not to get killed. Well, Panfilo, you've come to the right place. There's no better land to make your fortune and glory than here in Asia. Too bad it's not Asia. Ugh, Vespucci, not this again. I'm telling you, this isn't Asia. It's two completely new continents. Yeah, right. Two new continents nobody ever knew about. Next thing you're gonna tell me there's two more that have yet to be discovered. Just remember the name of the person that told you so. Ain't nobody gonna remember you.
As a matter of fact, throw in Madagascar, it might be 3.
Your name, Amerigo. I mean, seriously. How could there be continents out there hidden and secured from everyone? Well, I know a way. Really? How? They could use Surfshark VPN. Ha ha ha. Very
Here's
funny,
the paid
guys.
ad
The
I
old
was telling you
sponsor
about.
fake out bit
I
again.
figure why not.
Oh, you even downloaded a logo this time. Dude, this is real. This channel landed a sponsor.
I'm proud of you.
Ah! We gotta get everybody in on this. Governor, quit your humping. We got a sponsor. Caesar, great news. We're making Caesar Part 2? No, we got a sponsor. Who's even bigger than these guys? God, you gotta come. Who dares to serve the Lord? We got a sponsor. Holy shit, for real? Surfshark is a VPN, a virtual private network app and extension that keeps you and your data safe online.
This
It
is how
encrypts
you
your
do a
information,
commercial.
making sure that any snoopers won't be able to see what you're doing or where you're doing it from. Yeah, but can I just use incognito mode? Incognito mode? Are you kidding me? Look at that icon. What do you think? You think that's a spy? No, that guy's a pervert. You gonna trust your internet security to a pervert? And my favorite part of Surfshark is the ability to virtually relocate yourself around the world to access region-locked streaming catalogs on services like Netflix by accessing one of their 3,000 plus servers in over 100 countries. In an instant, you can virtually transport yourself to Siam. Wait, I'm being told Siam isn't a country anymore. Czechoslovakia? That one's not a country anymore either?
Yeah.
Okay, Taiwan? Oh, I'm being told that one was never a country to begin with. And with one Surfshark account, you can protect unlimited devices. Windows and Mac devices, iOS and Android, your smart TV, your router. Will it work on him? Your goat. Yeah, I don't want anybody knowing how I use my goat. Gross. Please leave. Okay, so bottom line is that you should totally get Surfshark VPN and enter the promo code Drawn of History to get an extra 3 months free. Surfshark is a fantastic way to keep yourself safe online, and using them is a great way to support the channel. John, what is this? I heard we got a sponsor. I'm the Surfshark. Now, back to the video. Over the next 2 decades, Panfillo would learn the ins and outs of being a conquistador. First, in places like Jamaica and Hispaniola with Escoval. Okay, Panfillo.
Sasquatch story time. So, one of the first Christmases I spent with my wife, we went down to Savannah and we met like the majority of 2 sides of the family on that side of her family. Huge family. It's ginormous. And I got to meet her grandfather, who was a Lutheran minister for some number of years. I'm not exactly sure where, but he had slipped a little bit down the dementia chute, and so he wasn't actually firing on all cylinders. And so we had the same first name, and so when they introduced me to him, there was a little bit of a confusion that took place on who was introducing who to who, because we had the same first name and yada yada yada. Okay, so at one point in time during this meeting, this get together, there's this family absolutely everywhere, and he reaches over, puts his hand on my shoulder, he points at all these little figurines on the mantelpiece over the TV fire that's in the fireplace, and there's all these figurines, and it's the nativity scene and all of the saints and all, you know, the whole Christmas shebang's up there. But one of the guys had his head broken off, and he leans over, whispers in my ear, he says, "Hey man, I can't for the life of me remember who all those people are, but that guy right there, that's John the Baptist." And I blew snot all over that TV, laughing hard at him, because it was one of the most hilarious tidbits I'd come across in a coon's age. It was hilarious to me. Just tickled my pickle so hard.
Yo, let's do this again. We were able to defeat these people because of, horses? No, Spanish steel. Wait, gunpowder weapon? No, I got it. Crippling diseases that they have no resiliency against and can travel even faster than we do. Superior culture and religion. Let's try another one. Now that the native people have stopped revolting over the fact that we killed one of their chiefs, we work to make a peaceful, cohesive society? Panfillo! Sorry, Escoval, I forgot. Enslave most and massacre the rest. My mistake. It's okay. It's only a mistake if you don't learn from it. In 1511, he assisted his relative, Governor Diego Velázquez, in conquering Cuba. I'm doing it! I'm conquistadoring!
I see. You're a real bastard out there.
Hey, Bartolome de las Casas. How does your honor like what these our Spaniards have done? That I command you and them to the devil! Oh, what sort of animal are we? How can we do this to our Indian brothers? The slaughter, the bondage, are they not men worthy of the same respect? Oh, I will write to the King of Spain and petition for the abolishment of the enslavement of the Indians. Whoa, Las Casas. For living 500 years ago, that's incredibly progressive. And instead... Wait, what? And instead... There doesn't need to be an instead. End of sentence, full stop. Instead, I'll advocate for the use of African slaves here in the Americas. You know, You had it. You were doing so well, and then you drove the car right off the cliff. If this is where the story of Panfillo de Narvaez ended, he would have been like a multitude of other conquistadors. Brutal, vile, but in context unnoteworthy. But Narvaez's fate would soon be intertwined with a young officer that had served under him named Hernan Cortez. Why is it that you wish to go off to this island of Cozumel? As an emissary of you.
I would love to find a channel that does this kind of work that I could do voice work for. That would be absolute. That would solve all my problems. I mean, we could sit around, wait till it blew up, absolutely huge, and then send me a check. I'll be happy with it. It'll be fine.
You, of course, Governor Velasquez, to establish trade relations for vital supplies, such as Indians to work the mines, and if any gold is discovered, you would receive your fair share, of course. Of course, but I must say, Cortez, you have time and time again proven to be a man of dangerous ambition. How can I trust that you will remember that you answer to me? Oh, Velasquez, a lesser man might be insulted by this lack of faith. Really? Then why are your men loading t-shirts with little Cortez Calvins peeing on my name? Well, you know how they send the shirts of the Subaru to Africa? It's kind of like that. Listen, Governor, you have nothing to worry about. The expedition I am about to embark on, I do solely in your name and authority. Welcome to Cortezistan. I'm the governor now. Hello, native people.
Right?
I assure you we come in peace.
Congratulations, citizens. Welcome to my new land. You may bow before me now.
Now, clear that disgusting viscera off that temple so we may have mass like civilized men and consume the body and blood of the Lord. Sir,
wait, you're cannibals?
Captain Cortez has disavowed all allegiance to you and placed himself as the governor of the mainland. Of course he has. So, what are you gonna do? Get me Panfillo. At first, I thought they handed me the wrong dossier. I couldn't believe they wanted this man arrested. He was traditional, Italian, and included endless salad and breadsticks. And then I realized I had the wrong dossier. It was actually an Olive Garden menu, but the one on Cortez was interesting too. It seemed that no matter what he had come across, he had found a way to handle it. And we shall call it...
Okay, so there's this series of books called the Iron Druid Chronicles, and I don't remember the name of the guy who narrates the audiobooks of those, but he sounds just like this dude.
The settlement Villarica de la Veracruz, and I shall be the governor. Cortez, despite what you say, we insist that this expedition is still under the authority of Governor Velasquez. What you're doing is treasonous and illegal, and we must go back to Cuba. I understand. I encourage such loyalty. How about you take a brief excursion into the jungle for provisions while I ready your ships? Yeah, that would be quite helpful. Hey, thanks for being so cool about this.
Right.
No problemo. Sink those f***ing
10 minutes later, it's a burning ruin. Homie was like, we're not going back. Screw that joint.
ships. Let those copolos swim home while the rest of us get rich. Hey, do those floating temples belong to you? Why, yes. And who might you be? I'm Zamakoto, Kashika the Totanak. Yeah, just wanted to make sure that those things didn't belong to Moctezuma. Mocte who? Moctezuma? Leader of the Mexica and all-around douchebag? He runs everything around here. And you don't like them? Oh, please. They force my empire into submission. The taxes and tribute they demand is ridiculous. And he makes us hang our toilet paper under rather than over, which just ain't right. Ah, but what if you have a cat? Well, that's your first mistake right there. Now, if someone was to knock him off his temple, they'd find us Totonocs most grateful. Ah, crap, here come his lackeys. Men from the east, we are emissaries from his holiness, his worshipfulness, the Mexico ruler Moctezuma. Your presence here is allowed, but his awesomeness...
I suspect homie had good chocolate.
Moctezuma insists that you travel no further. Well, I must insist on meeting with your most excellent ruler. Not for me, of course, but on behalf of my king, Charles V. See, if I don't, it'll be a whole thing when I get back. You're really putting my balls in a vice right now.
Moctezuma anticipated this, and as a consolation, he has granted you this bounty.
Heavenly boners, that's a lot of gold. Oh boy, guys, see, what you don't get about us, we Spaniards know a sickness of the heart that only gold can cure. We also have syphilis. You got anything for that? Yes, Cortez might be a master tactician and beloved by his men, but I can be that too. Plus, I have like 3 times his forces. This can't possibly go tits up. Captain Narvaez, the natives have greeted us with gold. How should we split it up amongst the men? We? You got a mouse in your pocket? As captain, that gold's mine. Now, I need to take a little nap. What should we do? I don't know. Drink the water? When Panfilo arrived in 1520, he had no idea what had transpired in the Mexican capital of Tenochtitlan the previous November. Oh my, this city is amazing.
They have a similar...
It's larger than anything in Europe. The engineering of the causeways, the temples. Holy shit, the McDonald's even have working ice cream machines.
Spaniards, halt!
Are you...
All right, I'm calling bullshit right now. There's shenanigans at stake. See... There's no way there is a McDonald's with a functional ice cream machine. I don't believe you.
Moctezuma?
Yes. Now, why have you entered Tenochtitlan? You know, when I especially asked you not to, I mean, dude, I gave you like a magic bottle of gold to stay away.
Yes, but it would be rude not to return the dish. Here, have some flan. And while you're at it, please pledge fealty to the one true King Charles V.
Huh? Why would I do that?
Because you think we're gods, right?
These guys are hilarious. You think I think you're gods?
Yes, well, I mean, what do you think that is?
A guy on an animal. I can see his feet.
But don't I look like one of your gods returning from the east?
Who? Quetzalcoatl? Yeah. Spitting image. Listen, I know you've been conversing with some of the more dissatisfied people of my empire. I get it, but since you're here already and that kinda looked like a big pass if I locked you out, why don't you stick around and maybe we can talk about some kind of alliance?
And maybe instead of sacrificing people atop the temple, you can put up a portrait of the Virgin Mary?
This guy!
Moctezuma set up Cortez and his men in his deceased father's palace. Over the course of the next few months, the two sides tried to suss each other out. There's just so much gold.
Is that all you guys think about? You act like it's useful for anything other than jewelry and statues. You should pine over real value, like cocoa.
Leaves and beans? Of what value are they?
You know what? You're right. I'll drink my hot chocolate and you drink your hot gold and we'll see who's smiling.
Your worshipfulness, a package from Qualpopoca in the east has arrived and you better take a look at it.
What is it? Oh, jeez.
Moctezuma, what's in the box?
Okay, don't freak out.
What's in the box?
What's in the box? Dude, that's my guy's head.
I know, dude, and it looks bad, but hear me out. Yes, I had sent my soldiers to kill your Spaniards, but that was before I met you. We can still
Some
be
Kill
close,
Bill
right?
shit.
Cortez took Moctezuma hostage, but still left him in charge, which seems kind of odd considering he was in the heart of the Mexican Empire. But one must understand that Moctezuma himself was seen as a god to his people. Cortez, knowing this perception gave Moctezuma his value, allowed him to continue to rule as a puppet. And Moctezuma, knowing that showing weakness might inspire rebellion, went along with it. It's even recounted that Moctezuma played board games with his captors to pass the time.
J10?
You sunk my caravel. Excuse me, but I thought this video was about how awesome I was. Not quite, but this is where Narvaez re-enters the story. Cortez received word that Narvaez had landed on the orders of Velazquez. He decided to take care of him himself.
What a crap conquistador do you have to be for 70% of a video about you to actually be about the guy who was cooler than you?
But needed to leave someone in charge back in Tenochtitlan. Alvarado, there will be a substantial reward for keeping the peace here. You are free to use any methods necessary, but I want them alive.
I eat gold because it makes my dookie sparkle.
Disintegrations, as you wish.
You're leaving that guy in charge? He looks like he would dropkick a baby.
Narvaez, with roughly thrice the soldiers as Cortez, quickly made his way north along the coast towards Tenochtitlan, making camp at the native city of Sempoala. Hello, savages! We are on our way to arrest Hernan Cortez. Will you help us on our noble quest? Why does he think we understand what he's saying? He's speaking Spanish and we're speaking Nahuatl. Yeah, he's confused. This whole video's been fast and loose with language barriers. Senor Narvaez, I come on behalf of Captain General Cortez. He is on his way and is wondering if perhaps an amicable arrangement can be reached that would satisfy both you and your men. No dice. I will control all of this once I have Cortez in chains and my men lust not for your disgraceful bribes, but rather are solely content by being under my command. Of course, that is plain to see. They clearly live to heed your command. Might I see you parade your men to display just how obedient they are to your orders? You heard the envoy. Parade will now advance. Very impressive. Almost as fast a pace as Senor Cortez can do. Almost. Double time, hombres! And thus Narvaez was tricked into parading his men into near exhaustion.
4 hours later.
Oh, I also taught them how to do the Thriller dance. Would you like to see that too? That won't be necessary. I best be going. The hour is late, and besides, it looks like it's gonna rain. Well, boys, I believe we made quite an intimidating impression. I doubt that dog Cortez will have the cojones to show his face. Senor Cortez, so we finally meet.
I'm gonna go out on a little bit of a different way tonight. Where I did a thing, the Twitter story thing. I don't know how many of y'all might have seen it, but I did a video, and I'm going to play it for my outro tonight.
I served under you in Cuba, you moron. Irregardless, by the authority of Governor Velasquez, I am placing you under arrest. Really? You and what army? My army of like 1,000 guys? You mean the 1,000 that have already defected to my side on the promise of untold riches? Wait, what? Oh, you jerks. How could this day get any worse? Cortez had Narvaez imprisoned at the garrison of Veracruz for the next 2 years. Nobody knows the trouble I seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. All right, Narvaez, it's time. Cortez? I'm sending you back to España. You're no longer a threat now that the conquest of the Mexica is over. Really? You conquered their empire? How? Well, after I defeated and arrested you, I returned to Tenochtitlan to find it in utter chaos.
Yeah, it's probably the comical.
What the hell is going on here?
Hey, don't blame me. Everything was going fine until this psycho went on a rampage mission.
They were getting ready to ambush us.
We were celebrating the Feast of Toxcatl.
God damn it. Why do white people always lose their mind whenever indigenous people start dancing in circles?
Facts.
Montezuma, talk to your people.
I don't think my people are gonna listen to me. Why don't we try sending my brother out to calm them?
Fine, whatever.
Okay, he's talking to the people, and now he's the leader of the resistance.
Moctezuma, do something!
Okay, guys, I hear you. I know. These Spaniards, right? But they're not so bad. Dude, not cool. I'm still the emperor. You do not throw rocks at me. Whoa, do that one more time and... So, we gotta get out of here.
Change of plan, fella.
We left the city. Barely 400 of us made it out alive. Hernan, this is pretty bad. Oh, you think? We're down to a handful of guys deep in enemy territory, completely surrounded. Death is surely around the corner. Hey, guys. La Vaca, are you here for us? You would think, right? Nah, I'm just here with my buddy Smallpox. Turns out he stowed away on one of Narvaez's ships, and I'm gonna show him around town. Within a few months, 40% of the Mexica were dead from disease. Apparently brought over by the African slave Francisco Orwega, a member of your expedition. Great. I'm the one black guy named in this video, and I get blamed for spreading a plague. So in a way, I brought down the Mexica. I'm a good conquistador. No, you're an idiot. You're not even good enough to have imposter syndrome. You're greedy and vain, and not in the good ways. How do you expect your men to look up to you? Well, How else can they look up to me unless I let them down?
Go home, Panfilio. You are not a serious person.
But he
Leave
does
the
have beautiful
conquering
hair.
to the
That's what got him
real
in this all in the first place.
Conquistadors. Fine. Just let me pack up my toilet wine.
Toilet wine.
Well, yeah, I've been locked in here for 2 years. How else am I gonna get wine? You want some?
I guess. This tastes like piss.
Well, of course it does. You see any grapes?
There goes the worst conquistador I have ever met. His ineptitude and incompetence will surely lead to his name being forgotten in
It is
history.
really good.
Unless he is dumb enough to return. Hey, have you ever noticed that sunsets in the New World produce foreshadows?
All right, everybody. That was pretty good. I enjoyed all of that. Nope, that's not right. Not doing that. We're doing this. Yeah, we're doing that thing. All right. So let me find the thingy thing with the thinginess that I was doing. Right. So I did this thing, right? And apparently there is a group of people on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and they all got into this meme war. And recently, a guy named Shadow of Hawk, a YouTuber out there, decided to write it out as a epic fantasy adventure because why not? And he explains it pretty well in the intro part. I went and did the narration and edited it together, and I think it's hilarious. Anybody who saw the Samuel the Infamous Sasquatch Shills episode will recognize some of this stuff, but I think it's hilarious. So I'm going to leave this with you instead of doing the usual little walkout thing. The StreamYard link's posted up there if anybody wants to come swing in and say hey. And do we not have sound again? This is something much less serious. That's madness. Oh, I have to be here for the sound to happen. That is the madness that's taking place. Okay, let's fix absolutely everything while we're screwing everything up. Right? Right. So this is how we do this. The Chronicles of Picklestan. A Twitter story. As a warning, this is something much less serious than my other stuff. This is based on a meme war from Twitter amongst people in the community I stream with that I turned into a dark fantasy story because why the hell not? And I hope you enjoy. This is brought to us courtesy of Samuel the Infamous by Shadow of Hawk 551, narrated by Caucasian Sasquatch. Like, comment, and subscribe. Forget dreams and wonder, for both are dead. The darkness that chokes the world has killed dreams and wonder. This is a world of spite, war, and hate. There are no heroes, only villains who are less vile than others. These are the Picklestan Chronicles. The Pickles of Picklestan have always been a peaceful people, growing their young as cucumbers and then brining them in the salty waters of the Barrier Sea into pickles. They grow a variety of foods and trade them with foreigners, all ilks, as well as maintain the land-based trade routes that pass between the eastern and western continent. As major powers began to rise and fall, the Pickles found themselves under attack. Seaborne raiders from the anti-libertarian Marines, swamp-living witches, and heathens coming up from the south, and savage blonde-haired men with fur pelts and cowhide shields coming up from the lowlands to their southeast. They sought protection. They found it in the form of the Back-Taco Kingdom. The Pickles, having no real theology before this, began to praise the king of Back-Taco Kingdom, Dermy Wormy, as their defender and savior. They would offer up choice members of their civilization as a gift to the Back-Taco and erected great pyramids in his honor, their memory and praise, their protector. Eventually, the Back-Taco Kingdom, through hook or crook, pacified the tribes of Shock to its south, the lands of Adam to its north, and in some dark and unknowable pact, aligned the game land of Anna to its banner. This growing threat brought fears to the city-state of Hadouken, a growing industrial power in the region that made use of steel and steam to exert its will on otherwise tribal savages within its bounds. Its leader, Paul of the House Hadouken, sought out allies. He found them in the green-haired leader of the anti-liberal Marines, Tiff, and the many times cursed dirty T-Rex fucker Ryan. Through Ryan, he secured an alliance with the swamps, as for some unknown reason, the infamous deity of the swamps, Samuel, was the hetero life partner of the T-Rex fucker. Battle was had in the kingdom of the potatoes, when the great king of those peoples, Fractured Filter, was driven from his capital by the armies of Pocahontas, or, as she was known to her enemies, the dreaded Melee K. On the fields of Tuber, Fractured Filter joined the Power Couch Nation, a union of disparate factions against the dreaded foe of the Back-Taco Kingdom. And the following day, the armies of Dermy marched into view. Steam-belching tanks with steel hides were surrounded by potatoes that were furious at being driven from their homes. The flanks were guarded by T-Rex riding savages whose leader, Rex Ryan, led from the front. Interspersed behind the line were druids, cultists, and witches of Samuel, guarded by their throngs of savage heathens covered in vines and snake skins, all wielding long knives or bare fists for battle. These dark-hearted savages were commanded by the demon Kohai Masochist and the dread knight Larry, two of the most loyal retainers of the infamous, who had yet to take the field. On the opposing side were the armies of the Back-Taco Kingdom. The flanks were held by the kangaroo-riding Drusina of Gameland, their queen Anna standing upon her war chariot drawn by Herculean-sized snow leopards. Beside the flanks forming the bullhorns, their people were so known for, were the tribes of Shock, men with skin only slightly less white than those of the Gameland, with hair blonde like gold and armor and shields of thick animal hides from the beasts they hunt and butchered in the lowlands of Shock. Their preferred weapon, barbed spears for bringing down the great beasts of the lowlands, were forged with Gameland steel, a sign of the loyalty between the two nations. And for a reason unknown to the king of the Back-Tacos, the warriors of Shock would stink of the mint leaf. The core of the army were the oppressed peoples that had been broken under the Back-Taco. Tribesmen who only knew how to work iron and bronze. Adams, a race of identical-looking men that reproduced by sporing, who refused to bow to Dermy, were thrown either to the Back-Taco or to the war effort. The Adams were as endless as their suffering. And most numerous were the Pickles, a people who had no knowledge of warfare, yet made grand fodder for their numbers. Those that were war slaves were ones that had spoken against the Back-Taco, and they were to be used as arrow fodder by Pocahontas in the name of the back taco. The corps around the back taco king Dermy were dressed in lamellar armor of a variety of colors, with great two-handed curved blades, or arquebuses of a far northern make at the ready. Voodoo helms and demon masks hid their faces as banners strapped to their backs bearing their clan's crest billowed in the winds. And at the center of it all, raised upon a foul and gross temple throne, was the Back Taco King himself, Dermy Wormy. His foulness unrivaled, his obesity unequaled. The wails of 1,000 victims cried out from his back taco as he stared evilly upon the war that was to be had in his name. The field held its breath. A light dew coating the ground as two hosts stared each other down. The T-Rexes were the first to break the silence, the stink of ruse in their nostrils. They roared, and with their call, the Rangers of Requiem roared with their beasts. Rushing forward like great predators, they fought alongside in pawn. The Ruish Drusina feigned a withdrawal towards the horns of shock. But the Rex of Requiem knew this was a trap, for he had seen the warriors of shock lay low great beasts in his traveling days. He clicked his heels into the flank of his mount, Rexy, and she roared to her fellow Rexes, who obeyed and backed away from the trap. The tribesmen of shock, seeing this withdrawal as a sign of weakness in their beasts, broke ranks and surged forward, bellowing and screaming. Their warlord, Shaka Zulu, could not rein them in, instead bidding for his close friend Anna to join him in the charge. Half of Dermy's army was surging towards the lines of the power couch. The tanks of the Hadouken were the first to spill blood that day. A staccato of machine gun fire sounded out against the screams of the shock and tore into the maddened hordes by the dozens. Cannons meant to break through stone walls fired as mortars at the rude Drusinos, sending the bodies of Man, Rue, and Joey into the air as a bloody mess. Then the magics of the swamps came into range. Benedictions to Samuel, prayers to the spirits of the earth and sky were sung and screamed. Eldritch lightnings fell from the outer dark as the very ground rose against the charging clans. Kohai was about to unleash her dread power when the head of a druid near her exploded and thunder sounded from the east. Gameland sharpshooters, guided by Pickles, who had spent many seasons in the Potato Kingdom as farmers and traders, had set themselves up in the perfect place to target the Mage Corps. The magic was ceased as the denizens of the swamps fled behind and beside the tanks for cover. The Rexes upon the right flank, bitten by bullets that hurt like gnats to the great beasts, but were lethal for their riders and rangers, charged at the sharpshooters and were pulled out of position. The Rexes on the left flank, led by Rex Ryan, charged forward into the suppressed hordes of the shock, confident that the beast hunters could be broken by his army of beasts. But amongst the grasses, Pocahontas's partisans of premier pickle pathfinders were waiting with rope and wire. They charged unseen until it was too late at the legs and the feet of the Rexes and the men that ran alongside them, tripping them, tumbling them, felling them. And then the shock entered javelin range. Barbed spears flew screaming into the air. The scent of copper joined that of mint as the metal tips bit deep into the flesh of man and grounded avian. Rex Ryan upon Rexy was not deterred nor perturbed by the ambush and failed charge. His long sword swung violently from the back of Rexy, him hanging only by bungee rope as he swung from her back at the foe, hacking warriors of shock as she fed upon the blood and brine of their foe. On the right flank, without the Rexes to provide support, The snakeskin-wearing heathens of Samuel were overridden by Rue-riding Drusilla, whose beast kicked them back into their allies, only to be speared by the lances of Drusilla upon their back. And the shocks joined as vigorously. Javelins flew through the air into the effectively unarmored heathens. But these were not sane men who would fall into a gibbering wreck from such a lethal attack. They were madmen of the swamps, those who had seen the face of Samuel in their dreams. They were mad, pain held no form over them. They countercharged into the shock tribes without any fear of death, for their minds were broken. Shaka Zulu joined proper with his elites, surprised at the countercharge against the forces of his and his friends' mighty army. Anna herself committed her chariot and leopards, trampling the heathens as her cats played with them, their claws and twisted minds being the only thing to elicit screams from the maddened cultists. With the enemy too close, the tanks could not fire their main cannons, and they lost precious seconds as they quietened their guns, whilst debating whether or not to fire into the backs of their allies to kill the attackers. The Knight Larry took the initiative, charging into the battle flanked by screaming reserves of zealot dark paladins, and angry potatoes bolstering the forces of the heathens who had effectively stabilized the line against the shock warriors and driven off the Drusilla completely. As Anna commanded her forces to pull away, their advantage of momentum lost, to reorganize for a second charge. Within the command bunker, President General Paul of the Great and Glorious House Hadouken watched the battlefield shift and move on his battle map, his aides and spotters moving pieces to represent up-to-date information. Comms using simplistic line-of-sight radios were seen as the radio operators coordinated the crews of the tanks. Many were running low on ammunition and would need to cycle out to resupply, but doing so would leave many magic users exposed. Reports of how the T-Rexes and their supporting warriors on the left flank were nearly gone. The enslaved masses of the Back Taco Kingdom were driven forward with whips by Yaris and Noticus demon-masked taskmasters. Despite the woe for the power couch, there was enough room for Rex Ryan to rally his T-Rex riders and his rangers into something of a formation. Withdrawing at this juncture would expose their flanks and rear. They were not disciplined enough to back away controlled, so he committed to facing down the slave army. Arquebuses shrieked from the lines of Back Taco. As Rexy ran forward, her skull strong enough to shatter the tallest and oldest of redwoods to splinters, soaking up lead that intended to dig into her flesh and lay her low. Ryan was protected by her skull, and when they arrived at the enemy line, he swung along her side and began swinging his blade against the slave soldiers that surrounded him. Rexy dined upon the flesh, bronze and iron breaking upon her hide, brine and blood staining her teeth and clawed feet. Rangers of the Requiem joined the fray, and Rex's too. Even with the whipping and prodding by their masters, the slaves could not find the courage to charge forward with the jaws of such a foe. First one, then two, then 10, then 30, then 100, then 200, and soon the entire force broke. They threw down their demon-masked masters and trampled them to death, charging away. But this act saved the life of the Back Taco King, for the T-Rexes were hungry and enraged. The screaming, crying men in pickles were more appealing to run down than to fight the demon-faced men with thunder sticks and gleaming claws. That left Rex Ryan, his Rexy, who was the only one to rein in her bloodlust enough to stand with her rider, and a band of warriors out of position and outnumbered, being surrounded by the practitioners of Back Takoshido, the reformed shock warriors, and Melee K's Pickle Huntus' partisans of premier pickle pathfinders. Upon the extreme right flank, the Gameland sharpshooters executed a withdrawal that led the Rexes and riders and rangers into a gully where a group of shock charged out with javelins and boar spears, and Rue riders led by Anna charged into the exposed, unsupported flanks of Requiem's force. Half of the Requiem's contingent died out of sight of the Power Couch Nation, who were horrified to see the host of fresh shocks charging over the hills with songs of gunfire ringing out as officers and mages died. Hadouken ordered his tanks around the command bunker and ordered his reserves to take defensive positions. Machine guns, weapons of incredible value, were placed alongside crossbowmen and slingers within a line of trenches as the tanks withdrew, abandoning the front line. The heathens, uncaring and mad, fought on despite the impossible odds. The cultists and the witches threw caution to the wind and cried out for darker desires. Invisible forces tore through the warriors of shock. Men melted into mush, only to form into unspeakable writhing horrors with many limbs and eyes that popped like grenades only moments after being born, showering the men with viscera and bone shrapnel. Unlike the heathens, they feared death. Soon, the denizens of the swamps withdrew to the line of Hadouken, the ones not maddened by seeing their god's face. Those had died horrifically and brutally, but they watered the ground red. The potatoes fought to the last alongside the madmen, only withdrawing to drag their king away, who fought on despite his grievous wounds. The armies of the Power Couch had been segmented and torn apart, and as they readied for their final deaths, separated and alone, Dermy stood tall, his impossible bulk thundering against the base of his throne as he spoke. He offered mercy, so long as the leaders of this foolish opposition submitted to the backtalker. 1,000,000 voices cried out not to take the offer, to fight and resist and not believe his lies. He silenced them in an act too horrific to describe. But it was this act, this attempt at silencing the truth, that bid the Rex of Requiem to cry out, "Fuck you, Dermy, you fat fuck!" And he and Rexy and his riders and his rangers resisted the foe, fighting as though hell itself was at their backs. They fought the shock and the warriors of Baktakoshido and the partisans of Pocahontas. Then the skies boiled and blackened, and the air lost its sweetness. A horrific, indescribable horror descended from above, a body of endless tendrils gathering around a hooded face, a face hidden in blackness. Upon the hood was a beanie with a middle finger sewn on, the symbol of the infamous. And he spake, his voice not corporal, but appearing in the mind of every living thing upon the battlefield. Well, I say every day, it's a getting closer to taking a bath with my fucking toaster.
Greetings, welcome, and salutations to the, and I just jacked that all up, but you'll have to forgive me. 76th episode of Screaming Into the Void, where we talk about whatever the hell we feel like. My apologies for the lateness, folks. That was on me. I only recently got the link set up because I slept all day and almost didn't wake up in time for this, so here we are. But joining me today, we have Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm the Dirty Rex fucker, and I'm streaming from my phone. And from Gal's face, I sound super gay.
Okay.
To the enemies of the power couch, a horde of horrific and impossible shrieks sounded from the void. Not in their minds. A real sound, one that shook the world and could be heard as far away as Picklestan. But it left the power couch unharmed, and they responded violently. The Requiem broke free and withdrew. The heathens of Samuel rose from their wounds and fought on with their God in sight, and the Hadouken tank corps rearmed, rejoined the fighting, and battered and broke the shock in Gamelin Dracena. Dermy looked upon his shattered army and fled before the sight of his defeat. But he knew if he returned home, he could raise a new army, a greater army. He would break the power couch beneath his back taco. Then he saw it, a forest of masts upon the sea. The green-haired anti-liberal had led her fleet of marines and sailors against the capital of the Potato Kingdom. His reserves had been surprised and destroyed. The anti-liberals had established a carronade upon its walls of the fortress city and garrisoned it with fresh fighters. The Back Taco King knew he had been bested, and so he called for a truce. He was to return to the east and never cross over into the west. He was to relinquish his authority of his vassals and allow any of the people who sought freedom their freedom. The Adams and many other tribes cried tears of joy at this. Picklestan was split in two to allow a buffer state, as the Pickles themselves were still loyal to Dermy. The western half became Pickle Crane, an unofficial member of the Power Couch Nation and a protectorate of the Potato Kingdom. The city of Weed was given over to the anti-liberal Marines, severing the trade of weapons and armor from the Weebish River to the peoples of the Back Taco. It was a horrific and humiliating defeat for the Back Taco, but it was not the end. For whilst Dermy was battered, he was not broken, and a million voices still cried out from within the Back Taco as he plotted his next return. I thank you. My mama thank you too, but she dead.